The fall of Raymond Cole. Raymond Cole had never thought of himself as a cruel man. He had grown up in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by familiar faces, old wooden houses, and narrow streets where children played freely and dogs roamed without leashes. From a distance, Raymond's life appeared ordinary. He had a small job at a factory, a modest home he inherited from his late father, and very few friends. Most evenings, he sat on his porch, staring at the traffic passing by, wondering if life would ever offer him something more. But beneath that quiet exterior, Raymond carried frustration that had been building for years. Life had not been kind to him. His mother had died young, his father had been stern and cold, and Raymond had spent most of his teenage years alone, drifting through school without purpose. By the time he turned 35, he was stuck in a cycle of work, loneliness, and disappointment. He wasn't a terrible man, but he was bitter, quick-tempered, and restless. The day that changed his life forever began like any other. The sun was hot, beating down on the cracked pavement as Raymond returned from a long, exhausting shift at the factory. His shirt clung to his back, drenched in sweat, and his boots dragged across the ground with every step. His mind was clouded with irritation. His boss had shouted at him again, his wages were late, and the constant hum of machines at work had left him with a pounding headache. As he turned onto his street, a dog appeared out of nowhere. It was a scruffy brown mutt with ribs showing through its fur, clearly a stray that had wandered too far from wherever it came. The dog barked at Raymond, a sharp, piercing bark that echoed in the quiet street. At first, Raymond ignored it, but the dog kept following, barking louder, circling around his legs. He tried to wave it away, but the animal only grew bolder, snapping at the heels of his boots. Frustration boiled over. Without thinking, without pausing to consider, Raymond swung his foot and kicked the dog hard. The animal yelped in pain and stumbled backward, its cry echoing through the street like a broken note. Neighbors who had been sitting outside gasped. A young boy who had been riding his bicycle stopped and stared. Within seconds, whispers filled the air. "Did you see that?" He kicked the dog. Raymond froze. He hadn't meant for it to be so harsh, but the moment was already spiraling out of his control. The dog limped away, whimpering, while the boy dropped his bicycle and ran to tell his parents. Within hours, the story spread across the neighborhood. By nightfall, someone had reported him to the authorities. The next morning, 2 police officers arrived at Raymond's door. He tried to explain himself. He had been tired, angry, frustrated, and the dog had been aggressive. But the officers were unmoved. In their eyes, cruelty to animals was a crime, and the witnesses had all agreed on what they saw. Raymond was arrested and taken away in handcuffs, his neighbors watching silently from behind their curtains. The courtroom was packed on the day of his trial. Animal rights activists filled the benches, holding posters with pictures of dogs and words like "justice for the voiceless." The prosecutor painted Raymond as a violent man with no compassion. The defense attorney argued he had simply reacted in the heat of the moment, that he was not a danger to society, but the judge was stern. After hours of testimony and debate, the verdict was clear: guilty. Raymond was sentenced to 2 years in prison for animal cruelty. For Raymond, the prison gates looked like the end of his life. The clang of metal as the doors shut behind him echoed in his mind like a final judgment. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, steel, and fear. Prisoners watched him with cold eyes as he was led to his cell. He felt smaller than he had ever been, stripped of dignity, stripped of freedom. Days turned into weeks, and Raymond began to realize that prison was not only about bars and walls, it was about survival. Every prisoner carried a story, some darker than his, and every day was a test of strength. He found himself lying awake at night, haunted not only by the rough voices and footsteps in the halls but also by the memory of that dog's cry. He had thought it would be a small incident, forgotten in days. Instead, it had defined him, branded him in the eyes of the world. The man who had been invisible to society was now infamous. His name was spoken in news articles, whispered in neighborhoods, debated online. Some called him a monster. Others said the punishment was too harsh. But Raymond himself knew only one thing: his life would never be the same again. As the months dragged on, he began to reflect. He remembered his father's harsh lessons about control, about never letting emotions lead. He thought about the dog, not just the pain he caused it, but the symbolism. The dog had been helpless, voiceless, and he had lashed out instead of showing restraint. Perhaps the punishment wasn't just about the dog. Perhaps it was about every moment in his life when anger had controlled him instead of the other way around. Prison became his crucible, the fire in which he was tested. He learned quickly that survival meant humility. He kept to himself, avoided fights, and listened more than he spoke. Some inmates mocked him for being in prison just for a dog, but others respected the fact that he didn't pretend to be tougher than he was. Slowly, he began to adapt, and somewhere in the silence of those gray walls, Raymond began to change. As you listen to this story, remember that mistakes do not have to be the end of our lives. Sometimes, they are the painful beginnings of a new path. Raymond's story is far from over, but already it shows us that one moment of anger can change everything. And yet, one choice to grow, one decision to reflect, can also begin to heal what was broken. If this story has touched you, I want to invite you to support this journey. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next chapter of Raymond's life. Like this video if you believe in second chances, share it with someone who may need encouragement, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your voice matters, and together we can make this community a place where stories remind us of the power of change. The story of Raymond Cole is just beginning. Stay with us for the next part.